Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Digital Services Coalition's webinar. We'll get started here in just about 2 minutes. Thanks for your patience. And for those just joining, welcome and good afternoon to the Digital Services Coalition's webinar. We will get started here in just a minute or two. All righty, we'll go ahead and kick things off. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Digital Services Coalition's 2023 webinar series titled Defining Digital. It's only appropriate that we come today and talk about government on Flag Day, which is today, June 14th. My name is Chris Saluga, Director at For People, a member company of the Digital Services Coalition, and I will be moderating today's panel. I'd like to welcome you to what I think is going to be a fun and enlightening conversation on differentiating between product and project management in government. The Digital Services Coalition, abbreviated as the DSC, is a collection of agile technology design firms that serve or aspire to serve the government. We are working hard on our mission to be a trusted partner of the digital service community by having timely and relevant discussions and publishing educational material. Today is our second event in the Defining Digital series, intended to meet one of the DSC's strategic goals of creating a shared language between industry and government around the terms most commonly used or misused in digital services. We're doing this in 3 parts. The first, a webinar to learn from industry and government why these terms are important and how they are best described or used. This is what you are all attending now. Following today's presentation, we will host a workshop on June 20th to craft a description of the best practices that work for both government and industry. Registration for the free workshop is open, and continuing education credits will also be provided if needed. The link will be sent as a follow-up email to you after this panel concludes. Finally, continuing education, where we use the results of the workshop and webinar as the basis for future skill building, blogs, conversations, and in practical application. We are doing this in iterations, so if you can't make it to an event for one term or concept, there will be others throughout the year. We're not sure what exactly our final end product will look like, but we will be getting feedback throughout these sessions as to what will be most useful to government and industry. So we just shared a bit about our organization. Now we'd like to learn a little bit about you all. A poll will appear on your screen asking a bit about where you come from. We'll take about 10 seconds or so to fill that out and then continue. Perfect. Thank you for completing that. And as you can see, we have a wide variety of folks in the audience today, which is fantastic. Next up, One of the most important things for this webinar series is to have a great panel of experts in the field with us today. This panel represents an esteemed collection of those working in government, industry, and those who are making a career of working in both sectors. First, we have Rachel Ruche, who is a current product lead at the United States Digital Service, shipping products that make it easier for people to find and use their government services. Recently, at the Department of Veterans Affairs, she led the vision, strategy, and execution for a disruptive API-based technology platform, transforming how teams build software at the VA. Before joining USDS as a contractor, she led product management for several critical VA.gov customer experiences that grew the VA.gov's product monthly active users from 1 million to over 10 million. Next, we have Julie Maloney. Julie has spent more than 30 years as a builder of technical things, a builder of teams, and a builder of teams who build technical things. She served her first tour of duty at the United States Digital Service from 2016 to 2018, and a second tour from 2020 to 2021. During her time at USDS, she worked in both the product and engineering communities of practice and was once a director of product management and strategy operations. She led product management efforts across many government initiatives, such as the H-2A visa modernization project, the Vets.gov identity project, was a key player in deep discovery efforts around Medicare fraud, waste, and abuse, and worked on unemployment insurance modernization. Julie is currently the Vice President of Digital Solutions at Pluribus Digital, a firm building modern digital products for public service missions and a founding Digital Services Coalition member company. Andrew Anderson is a product lead at For People, a digital services company improving government data ecosystems. He leads product management on Data Connect, a modern data warehouse and data analytics platform for Medicaid data at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Before joining For People, Andrew worked at Network for Good, leading change management across product teams and overhauling nonprofit grant disbursement processes. Finally, we have Trey Gordner, who leads data and innovation initiatives at the Department of Health and Human Services through the U.S. Digital Corps. He designs and implements initiatives in data strategy and employee-led innovation that support HHS's mission to enhance the health and well-being of all Americans. Previously, he is the founder and CEO of a digital marketing company for public libraries and a product manager for advertising, education, and advocacy organizations. Outside of his day job, he is passionate about building civic tech products that support policy and housing reform. As you can see, we have a very talented panel of product experts here with us today. If you have any questions throughout the panel, please enter them in the Q&A box for panelists to address at the end of the panel during the Q&A portion of the panel. You can also upvote fellow attendees' questions. So with that, let's get going and kick off the panel with something light. The first question is to each of our panelists, and we'll work backwards from the order of introductions I just gave. And the first question is, in your own words, what is your definition of product management and project management? Trey, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I'm gonna cheat right away because I'm taking somebody else's words and not doing my own, but they're just so good. And I listened to the podcast recently with Jennifer Polka talking about her book, Recoding America. She says, project management is the art of getting things done. Product management is the art of deciding what needs to be done in the first place. So at least for my part, I can't say it much better than that.
That's an excellent summary. Andrew, anything to add on top of that?
No, that was really great. I might just kind of add to, that bit on product management of, really a process around identifying and understanding those needs of, your customers and your stakeholders and shaping the strategy and that roadmap of, creating that thing, that delivery, that service, what have you, versus project management might be, more of that kind of collection of tasks to achieve that goal that you're working towards. So, maybe thinking more of the kind of coordinating and executing towards those goals against the timeline. But love what you said, Trey.
Julie, what's your definition?
So thankfully, outside of panels like this, I never have to provide definitions because, as with anything in business and life, it depends. But usually absent of any context, I fall back to product management, typically more strategic, uncovering the right thing for the right people and getting it to them at the right time. nice and vague. Project management, typically more tactical, process-oriented actions to ensure that goals are met, risks are mitigated, resources are managed, budget isn't overrun, and communication is paramount. But to say that there's no strategy in project management or tactical execution in product management would be wrong, because in practice, as we all know, these two areas of effort smush together in very interesting ways that we'll learn throughout the day.
Awesome. And Rachel, what do you think about all these definitions?
Well, I fully agree with all that. And I think depending upon where you work, it's a spectrum between like what is considered project management or product management. The way that I think about it is both project and product managers are in the business of shipping. Product managers are shipping experiences that people love and that drive towards some desired outcome for the org. Project managers are shipping experiences that are on time, on budget, have all the details coordinated with the right people. That's kind of how I think about the difference. And if there are enough resources for both, it can be very effective to have both members on a team.
They certainly do work concurrently together. And Julie, you mentioned a little bit about how it depends, right, of how people view product and project management. So I'm curious, do you think that there's ever a conflict between these two techniques, right? And if not, how might they coexist together on programs?
Yes, period, full stop. Absolutely, of course there's conflict, but there's conflict in every cross-functional environment, and that's good and it's healthy. We don't have paradigm shifts unless things collide and blow up, right? So product and engineering and research and design basically exist to conflict with each other in some way. And in a perfect world, out of all that conflict rises a deliverable that's well balanced for the needs of all users. And so the same thing with project versus product, right? There got to be that balance between the strategic vision, tactical march toward that on time, on budget delivery, like Rachel was saying. How that happens depends on the humans involved. So if both people are unwilling to budge on whatever, that's not going to end well. If no one is willing to make a decision, that's also not going to end well. It'll end in a lot of swirl, which will never end, and that's bad. The give and take process is inherently one of conflict, and that's fine. That's awesome. In fact, people just have to be respectful of each other's skill sets, pain points, and overall value to the team, and how they are a puzzle piece within the greater product delivery practice. How do they fit? Nothing on paper about product or project management is inherently in conflict, but people sure can be.
People are critical, and we'll toss it to Andrew from a company who's centered around people for people. Andrew, what do you think about this conflict between product and project management, knowing that people are at the heart of what you do on a daily basis, right? Or, is this conflict going to be, present no matter how you navigate around it?
Yeah, I think to expand on that conflict may not necessarily just live at that definition of product versus project, but really the culture of the organization, right? I've certainly been in previous experiences where, hey, we've adapted Agile, we're Scrum, we're doing these things, but it looked very waterfall, right? So even just the way terms get used or the perception of this is how we're accomplishing something, back to Rachel's point, there's the end goal is, hey, we're trying to build and deliver these things. That's not to say that within product management I don't have a budget to think about, I don't have timelines to think about it. That doesn't mean some of those core elements go away. Of course your stakeholders want to know, hey, where are we headed, where can I expect or communicate to my leadership or my management or my core or my whomever on what it is y'all are doing. So I think there are instances where a project might turn into a product. I would hope, let's take an example of implementing maybe something off the shelf. Maybe you're implementing a customer relationship management tool or an audit tool or accounting system or whatever. Hopefully you're not iteratively forever installing or implementing a new one, right? There's probably a beginning and end to that project that you're implementing. But once you have that in place, maybe you're going to think about it more as a product. How are we going to expand our use of this tool, and thinking about that intersection of people and the technologies they're using in the business? Then you're starting to think a little more strategic about what it is we're using and consuming, and how that fits into our objectives, where we're going. And, that I think that applies really anywhere, not just industry or the government, but, some of those are things that I think about.
Yeah, I'd love to unpack that kind of transition, maybe from project turning something into a product. Rachel, in your kind of unique experience working on many different initiatives in government, right? Have you seen transition work or transitions happen from project management to government? Why might someone want to start transitioning from project management practices and implement product management practices?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, as Julie and Andrew were talking, it was reminding me of this thing that can sometimes happen when project and product managers are both working on the same initiative. And it's that because product managers are so focused on constant incorporation of data and user feedback into what the shape of the ultimate thing looks like that you're building, it involves a lot of experimentation, right? And the nature of experimentation is to fail on stuff until you get it right. And that's really hard to put into a discrete timeline with the dependencies perfectly mapped and all of that stuff. So that's where I've seen a lot of tension between project and product management. But exactly like Julie was saying, that's a necessary conflict, because you don't want to be experimenting forever. That's not great. You need a project manager to bring that side of the equation to the table. That's like, okay, well, we actually have some real deadlines we have to meet, So when I see the greatest opportunity for starting to incorporate product management into these public sector spaces is when you have some outcome that you're trying to reach as an organization that is not being met, or it's very visionary right now, and there's not really a whole lot of strategy together for what you might build, who you might serve, what audiences you might prioritize first, second, third, et cetera, in order to achieve that outcome. Or if you have products or processes or programs that are underperforming in some ways, maybe you're getting feedback from your customers that they're not thrilled with the service that you're providing. If any of these things are true for your organization, it could be a great time to bring in product management, because problem solving based on user research and data is the whole point of a product manager. And then they can collaborate really well with engineers, designers, project folks to figure out how to bring ideas to fruition. One example that I was going to share of a place where project management was the norm, and we kind of brought product to the table and got to a slightly different outcome than what was originally planned, was I was working with one agency who wanted to who enabled their customers to apply for financial benefits. And that application process was tough in a lot of ways, but it resulted in claims submitted by citizens that took over 200 days for the government to process. So to the agency's credit, they had this amazing vision that was what if we can get it down to 60 days? Super inspiring, really exciting. And someone from inside the agency was like, yes, let's establish a new program, staff it with people, an entirely new set of processes, and we'll put all this marketing effort behind it and comms, et cetera, et cetera. Really great idea. And exciting in all the ways and everything. But the question was, had there been any discussions with users or analysis of existing data around how people were applying today, where the blockers were in the process that were making it take so long to process these claims? Had any of that type of analysis been done yet? And the answer at that point in time was no. Product management was very nascent at this organization back then. So also to the agency's credit, they asked for some product expertise to come to the table. We did that user research and analysis and realized, actually, if we leverage plain language in the online experience for applying for this thing, and we fix a couple of the form flow pieces that were confusing people around how much or how little information to put into their application, our hypothesis was that for some types of applicants, they would get a lot cleaner submissions into VA, into the agency that would be a lot easier to process on the back end. And we tried it out, ran some experiments, and it worked. So that's kind of an example of where if you bring product to the table, you can just analyze a situation from a different angle and bring real user feedback into the conversation, test real things with real people, ask them what their experience is, watch them try and apply for stuff. And it can be a really helpful way to figure out what solution you want to prioritize putting your resources and investment behind.
That's an amazing example, right, of digging into the why, right, behind a problem, and then implementing techniques on top of that to unpack that why, right, and then use that as an anchor for, future initiatives. Julie, I know you've done a lot of work in that space as well, digging into that why, right? So how would you approach implementing product management practices on a program and dig more into that why and uncover those user needs?
I think that's it right there. Like, product management practices are inherently user-centered. If the work that's being managed has any sort of user aspect to it, then putting that user at the forefront, or at the center, I guess, if we do user-centered design of the strategic plan, the tactical practice is what you're in for. And that means when push comes to shove on budget and schedule and resources, the product management mindset has to be first, what will lead to the best outcome for the user? That's little nuance is kind of it. That's just the difference. It can be a very meaningful, far-reaching difference, but as part of that, like, product and project smushed together in interesting ways, like, it can just be a mindset shift. So, like, back to the actual question of, like, if you're just managing work, why would you implement product management practices? I don't know, maybe you don't. Like, if there's not a user to center the practice around, and budget, schedule, resources in your repetitive widget making is all you're doing, then focus on that. That's great. You're not wrong. It's fine. It's better for all involved. Don't shove a square peg into a round hole. But I would argue, probably, that even in the repetitive widget making example, there's probably a user there that you need to delight. The user might even be the system. How do I make the system run better? And then downstream effects to users, etc. What is the experience? Could be the system, could be your AWS bill, right? What is the experience you're trying to make better, happier in some way? And to that end, the issue does become one of blending those two product and project practices together in a way that has the least friction for all involved. It might look like waterfall project management with some checkpoints for user research and some more eventual shifts into requirements that you might see in a prototypical agile environment. Like, okay, let's be honest, there's a lot of agile product management out there that actually looks like waterfall with some check-ins. That's okay. That can be okay. You got to do what works, and it all sort of the thing that you want to bring into your program is the thing that works. Whether it's project or product or that nice little smushing together of both, it's not a zero-sum game, right? Like, you're not bad and your project's not going to fail if it's just project management. It's also, you're not great and awesome and it's going to succeed if you use product management. Got to value them both. And when you're introducing something, which I think all of us are in the business of doing, and I think there's probably a question about this later on, about bringing these things into an area, an agency, an organization, or a contract that is historically waterfall or project based. Your job is to not disrupt, but to continue operations in a positive way. And I think that comes from smushing those things together. Hope that was vague enough for everybody.
Just vague enough. Go ahead, Rachel.
Well, what you were saying, Julie, was reminding me of how a lot of agencies kind of split their work on products between O&M and new development. And if that is the culture and scenario at your agency, then product management might not be for you. like the O&M stuff, if it's framed in that way as like separate from new development, by nature is not going to benefit from a whole lot of like user research, iteration, et cetera. But if you're at the point where you want to move your organization to a culture where O&M stands for operations and maintenance, for those who aren't familiar, if you want to move to a culture where operations and maintenance are handled by the same exact people who are also responsible for new development, which in my opinion is the best way to build and manage products, then if you're ready for that kind of culture change, that's when it could be helpful to have product folks start coming on board to facilitate that transition.
It's a good transition question into the next kind of topic I want to get into, which is starting to get more into the tangible implementation elements, right, of this on programs. And we were just talking a little bit about some of the people that implement these elements on programs and how those people are very critical, right? And skill sets that those people have are very critical as well. So Trey, I'm going to toss this over your way. In your observations and your experiences, what do you think are some of the critical skill sets that product managers have? And likewise, what are some of the critical skill sets that project managers have?
Yeah, so one little grace note I want to add to what Julie and Rachel were saying before is that, product management, whether or not you have someone called a product manager at your organization, product management is happening, right? Decisions are being made on behalf of users. The real question is whether you're doing it whether you need to be doing it in a more systematic way. And that is what the product manager adds. It's a systematic approach, kind of like, the scientific method for experiments. There's the product management method for uncovering user needs and managing those. So I think, like they were saying, if you don't have a need for a systematic approach, if it's working well for you to sort of do it intuitively with the people you have, sure, continue that way. But there may come a time, whether you're working on a new product or you're changing your structure of your organization, or somebody leaves, or all kinds of possibilities that mean you might have to reconsider that decision. So, okay, now that I got to help answer the last question, I'll answer this question about skill sets. So I think there are a lot of skills that project and product managers have in common, especially the soft skills. It helps for both of them to be pretty organized, to be able to communicate effectively, both vocally and in written and visual communications. And also, I think it helps in general to have some data analysis ability, because it helps to be able to evaluate the quantitative data that's coming in from users and from projects, as well as the qualitative data, the feedback you're getting. So some ability there is helpful too. I think more relevant to product, strategy, facilitation, user research, and in particular, product managers need to be more sensitive to the upside possibilities. So opportunities, new markets, kind of thinking in that vein. Project managers, I would say, logistics, finance, having some understanding of what things cost and how long they take is essential. But in general, project managers, I think, need to be more sensitive to the downside possibilities, risks, and mitigation. So those are my thoughts on the skill sets.
Awesome. Andrew, I know you and your day-to-day, right, kind of walk the fine line sometimes between project and product. You witness that on programs that you're a part of, right? What do you see skill sets that, what skill sets do excellent product managers have? What skill sets do excellent project managers have?
I think if I unpack the communication skill set for a product manager, this is probably someone who is good at storytelling. They're good at connecting the dots of, hey, we're building a vision that, we're headed this direction that's going to meet and, achieve kind of fulfilling the needs of our users, putting people, at the center of, hey, what we're trying to build and improve. And I think really just, being able to kind of articulate, because again, I think within this iterative process, we're talking about kind of testing and research and putting something out there and getting feedback. There's trade-offs. and prioritization. And so you need to be able to convey, this is why, this is something that's more valuable or should come first before something else, because, time is really your resource that you're managing. There is, hey, we only have X number of folks who can work on the delivery of something. We can't do everything all at once. How do we, help craft that narrative of this is how we get there? And I think, again, towards the project side and kind of being more tactical, the communication might be more questions around, where are we at? Are we on track? I'm balancing or looking at these different pieces, these different metrics that, as was noted, logistics and risk and all that. That's not to say that, again, kind of the lines blur and there's, as you're iterating on the product side, you can't just make this very extremely risky, costly bet, holding something up, trying to cram in all these features or cool and shiny things. It was never going to meet the mark or was going to take so long to actually get that into the hands of your users, then you're really, at the end of the day, you're kind of failing to deliver that value. And kind of that's the thing that is kind of the thing you want to avoid really in all these scenarios, right?
Absolutely, for sure. Yeah. And you alluded a little bit to how you can tangibly implement, or how a product manager or project manager can tangibly implement a couple of those techniques on programs. Rachel, you also talked about before an example you gave about transitioning from project to product. Right? I'm wondering if it's, that example or other examples in your previous experience, right? How have you or you've seen teams successfully implement product management? Maybe borrowing some of the definitions and skill sets that we just talked about that project and project managers have.
Yeah, sure. And for everyone's awareness, I have been both a project manager and a product manager. So I've seen both of those coins. And I also have implemented product management within agencies as a contractor and helped agencies stand up their own fully staffed product orgs as a Fed. So I have I've seen a wide variety of things. I would say some of the things that I think drive success in standing up product orgs are there has to be an appetite from it somewhere in leadership. Like there has to be some kind of champion. That's not to say that if an individual is interested in bringing more of a product lens to the work that they do, there are all kinds of ways to do that for sure. But if an agency wants to, or an office within an agency is interested in like building the right things for the right people at the right time, the way that Julie described product management at the beginning, switching to that culture of delivering something on time, on budget, that is a culture shift that is going to necessitate support from somewhere within leadership. So my experience at Department of Veterans Affairs was there already was an extremely supportive CTO in place who was like super down with this way of working and wanted to drive that inside the organizational culture. So it was pretty seamless to come on board and be able to advocate for when a timeline needed to change based on when we learned something new from users, which in a different agency culture might be an extremely difficult conversation to have. It was also easier to communicate things like, no, we don't have a 5-year plan because we don't know what users are going to need in 5 years. Or no, we don't have the full feature set defined for what we want to launch 1 year from now. We have the problem space defined and we have some hypotheses that we want to test. And we're going to show you stuff that we ship this month, next month, et cetera, and what we learned from that. And eventually you'll get something great that meets user needs a year from now. But those are the types of conversations that happen in agencies where there is buy-in at the leadership level for product culture. So that's one thing that I would say is pretty critical to success. But there are a lot of ways to bring product talent in. There's hiring, and there are a variety of ways now because traditional government job descriptions usually don't quite fit the bill for the types of skills that you might be looking for in product. But GSA has done a lot of work recently to kind of develop some new pipelines for getting product talent into agencies. So that's a cool way to explore. Another cool way is hiring contractors. There are a lot of contractors out there who have really excellent product talent on their teams, and can bring that in. The other thing that I would say is really helpful to be able to start leveraging product management in the public sector is if there is a commitment by leadership to do some kind of overarching strategy development so that it's clear like what outcome the agency is trying to impact. And I really don't mean requirements for what thing you want to build, because that's way too prescriptive. But if you know what problem you want to solve, what metric you want to change, something like that, if that can be agreed upon by leadership, so that any product folks who sit under leadership and are responsible for driving work toward that outcome have that strategic clarity. I have found that to be really important for successful implementation of product management in the public sector, probably anywhere.
Julie, you've been both on the federal side as within USDS and also as a contractor, right? Have you could you provide a couple examples of how you've seen successful implementations turn out?
Yeah, I'm gonna take a little in a non-shocking turn of events. I'm gonna be a little vague, and I'm gonna say it depends a whole lot. And so you mentioned been a Fed with USGS and been on the other side. I also had like 23 years of not working anywhere in the government at all. And it's all relevant, right? So in my roles over the last 7 years or so in the government, my job has explicitly been to either bring modern cross-functional human-centered product development teams into organizations that have none, or they have some and they're not working well. Two very broad areas. And so to that end, I try, so this is like purely about me, right? I try to zero in on the core problem at hand. What is blocking that implementation of product management, or what is, either it doesn't exist or it's not working. So what is blocking that? So is it attitude? We don't want your newfangled thing, it's scary. Is it aptitude? We can't grasp that newfangled thing. Or is it available resources? Like, we don't have the people to spend the time doing these different user-centered things. Those are all valid reasons. And so depending on what that starting point is, I do something, don't know what, probably going to be like, Julie, this is only valuable if you tell us what you do. I'm like, I don't know, I make it up each time. Whatever is necessary to bridge the gap. For instance, in the case of the attitude issue, I'm going to work with those folks to dispel the fear of the FUD, right? The fear, uncertainty, and doubt around product management is going to change everything. I'm never going to know when anything's released. It's going to be crazy. Get those folks involved and, make champions to help with the change. Like, oh, you're actually afraid that you're never going to be able to report to your superiors and your job's going to be on the line because we do Agile and we're not doing waterfall. And so you don't ever know when things would be like, I'm going to work with you to dispel that, to reframe the problem, to reframe the information. To me, implementing product management is just instilling a product mindset. And that could look like a lot of different things, right? Which means fundamentally, though, focusing on the user, which means going all in every aspect of communication to put that user front and center. So if there's one thing I do, it's ask the questions, ask them again, be that annoying person in the room who pushes people to understand and synthesize the issues on their own so they can grow their own product mindset. And I'm going to help shepherd them to success, whatever success might be. At that point, then we can project manage the specifics in the ways that they're really comfortable doing. And voila, we iterate and deliver, and all of a sudden everybody's doing Agile and users are happy. So really magic is my answer.
I have a little more to add to that because I super duper agree. especially about the part about how capacity building is such a big part of it. And especially in places where product management is not yet the norm. And I was just thinking of some examples that I've seen where the transformation has been made. And sometimes there are two ways that I've seen it happen. One way is as an agency or like a leader within an agency, you start with a really small experiment and you bring on a team of innovators who have product people, design people, engineers, depending upon what problem you're trying to solve. If it's not a technology one, then not engineers. But you bring some small group of people in to run an experiment with you. And oftentimes that like show, don't tell model goes a really long way. So in doing so, you know, as a product person in a small experimental team like that, you would want to bring a lot of folks in with you. So you have stakeholders sit in on user research with you. You have stakeholders be part of your go, no go conversations that you do before launching something. And everybody kind of starts to get a taste for what it's like to build in this way. And if you see success there, then it can continue to grow. So I've seen that happen. Another thing that I've seen happen is if there's a leader within an agency who is just like jazzed about working in a new way, they'll hire a director of innovation who is from a product or similar background. I've seen a couple of agencies do that, and then that person can hire an org to kind of lead in that way. So it's almost like the bottom up way and the top down way. And I have seen both be quite effective in different contexts.
It's a great elaboration. Thanks, Rachel. I want to toss it back to you. You know, the last question I want to ask before we go to the Q&A portion leans a little bit into what you just said, and having that bias for action is what I want to end the message with today. Is, you know, we talked a lot about implementation and implementation and implementation. We talked a lot about implementation in government, right? But what are some of the unique experiences or ways in which product is implemented in government compared to other industries? What sort of constraints, limitations, right, or value might government bring when implementing product management?
I love this question because product management in government is unique, and the product practice kind of started in Silicon Valley, where there are like these two big maxims of fail fast and I forget what the other one is that I like to talk about all the time. But in government, the stakes are completely different. The stakes are super high. The people that we're trying to serve, the outcomes that we're trying to drive are like life impacting things. If someone doesn't get something they need, it can impact their family, their ability to pay rent, their ability to get by day to day. And so, oh yeah, rapid experimentation was the other thing. Failing fast and rapid experimentation. There are ways to adopt the spirit of those things in government, but they absolutely cannot be implemented in the same way that they are in Silicon Valley. And I think that's an important thing to note. And for me, that has been an important thing to talk about with stakeholders as well, because a lot of government folks that I have had the honor to partner with at first, you know, are hesitant about product management because it's tied to those beginnings. And I think a lot of times it's associated with like high risk, fail fast, experiment rapidly. So that's in my opinion, that is the contextual difference in government. That means that it needs to be talked about in a different way and implemented in a slightly different way, but still borrowing from a lot of the innovations that come out of the private sector. So like, for example, when we talk about failing fast, and I even referenced this earlier in the panel when I was talking about like, you experiment, you're going to have some failures for sure. There still is a way to fail, but I call it fail safely. So whereas, you know, if you work at Uber or something, you might experiment with the color placement of a button, and it might mean that a bunch of people have a really tough time getting a ride that day. Experimenting in production is not a thing. So in production, experimenting live with the real thing that people use to get their services is not what I would recommend in public sector. So the way that product management should happen differently, in my opinion, in the public sector is you can do some of these experiments, but they're a lot more closed. It's not with the real deal that people are interacting with for their day-to-day livelihood. You have people opt in to try it out. So you're not like testing something out on someone unbeknownst to them, but you can have groups of people who opt in to say like, yeah, I love trying new technology and I would love to help the government do a better job. I'm down to try out applying for my unemployment benefits on this new thing that you're offering, you know? So that's one way that it's unique in the public sector. And then rapid experimentation. I would just modify the word rapid to quick. I mean, there's for compliance, policy, regulatory, legal, like as much as it is like we don't want to think about it, public perception of things can change congressional perception of things, which can change the possibility of implementing things. So for all of those reasons, there are just a lot more considerations that have to go into play when you're looking at like your checklist of things that you have to do to be able to like launch a new experiment. So I still super duper advocate for quick experimentation, but whereas in the private sector, that might look like 2 weeks, in the public sector, it might look like a month and a half. So that's another way that it's different. And I don't consider it like a downside. I consider it a duty to the people that we're trying to serve to make sure that we are doing right by them and crossing all our T's and dotting our I's. So those are a couple of the ways that I think it's different. A couple of ways that I think it's hard. You know, a lot of other folks have already touched on this. Their government is very risk averse. And even though, in my opinion, if product is implemented in the right way, it doesn't introduce new risk, it can sound risky through the description. So I think that's a hard thing. And also because of the way that government budgets work, a lot of times we need to be able to project stuff out really far in advance. That also is in conflict with experimentation and making changes based on what you learn from users as time goes on. So those are some things that make it hard to do product well in government, but I think the key to that is building really good stakeholder relationships that show, not tell thing, do small things to show how it works and actually de-risks success over time. And that's how you can create this space to do great product work in government.
Yeah, you're right. You know, we have a duty, right, to those who we serve, you know, and they rely on us and the services that, you know, the government provides for vital functions, sometimes just to live, right, get healthcare, get benefits, et cetera. So I love the concept of quick experimentation, but also failing safely. I think that's very important and a good caveat in government. Trey, we mentioned in your bio, you've worked in the private sector, right, leading your own company, founding your own company, and now in government. What are some considerations in your mind when implementing product management in government compared to those other industries?
Yeah, I mean, I think of this in two main ways. The one is that products, as I've seen in government, are not as strictly defined or as finely distinguished as they are in industry. So, you know, at Amazon, there's a team that strictly works on like the shopping part, right? That's their product. That it doesn't work like that in government. Products, as we think about them, can be policies, they can be processes, they can be service flows, they can be forms. And so what ends up happening is that the success metrics become less clear. I think that's a big challenge for product. I mean, without the bottom line, especially, it can be hard to get everyone agree to a specific measure or measures of success. And so in that way, product management in government, as I've seen it, becomes more like decision management. It's still about making good decisions on behalf of users, but it's not as much about the specific execution of software. And in many cases, the software system may not be the right answer at all toward addressing user concerns or user needs. The other main observation is that product management is different, I would say, in degree, but not in kind in government. You still have the same responsibility to users, you're still applying the same mindset and a lot of the same methods, but you're looking at a larger and more diverse group of stakeholders, a larger and more diverse group of users with more critical needs. You're looking at more policy requirements, which almost adds a function to your cross-functional teams. And the line between authority and responsibility, which is sort of the gray area where PMs operate in the private sector, is much brighter in government. And so that can limit your ability to shape decisions in some cases.
Excellent. I think that's a great place to wrap up for our question portion of this event. And now we'll kind of transition into bringing in some of the audience questions that have been asked in the Q&A panel. We're going to group a couple of these together because there are quite a number of similar themes between some of the questions that the audience have asked. And so the first question I'm going to summarize is going back to when we talk about implementing implementing product in government. We're not going to implement government in this session. And the question that the audience member asked is, how do you run your project in an agile way when customers still work in a waterfall manner, even when it's not said out loud? Julie, go ahead.
Ooh, pick me. You trick them. Seriously, you do it. You do your scrum the way you need to do your scrum to make your team successful, and you report it out in whatever boneheaded way they want to see their reports. You just trick them. Don't change what you're doing. Work within what they're, I mean, okay, if I'm not being hyperbolic, but literally I usually just trick them. You know, find the middle ground, etc., blah, 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 all those things are good things. But like at the end of the day, if somebody's like, I am paying you to deliver, this is a real example, I am paying you to deliver 237 points each month, wherein I am defining story points as hours, maybe, but you can't add those hours up to actually equal the number of people, and like it's stupid. But so point being, whatever your requirements are to fulfill your contract, do it. Don't let your team get bogged down in not being able to deliver in an agile and flexible way just because you've got to do some extra different reporting, and then work behind the scenes yourself to get them to change over time, if at all. Just trick them. I love my federal customers and stakeholders, but you know, sometimes I'm going to trick you.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Seems like trickery is the answer to that question, but in a nice and methodical way, it seems like. Question 2, the topic's kind of around partnering with designers and partnering with other teams. How do you think that product interacts with designers and researchers on the team, or other skill sets for that matter? And then second part of that topic of questions is, what are some of your favorite ways to team up with designers to show and not tell? Andrew, you want to go first? Yeah, sure.
Sure. Yeah, you know, I think what I've loved to do in the past with designers is be able to, you know, quickly iterate and get feedback and reaction before any line of code is written or any changes are actually made, right? Getting that, you know, concept out of their head and getting it on paper or getting it on a screen and being able to walk through an experience, or, you know, just really even giving your stakeholders that tangible, oh, I'm being heard, or I'm seeing, you know, what is in my head being put on paper. I think a lot of times, maybe, you know, humans are better at telling you what they don't like than what they actually do like, or what they even mean. And so the faster you can get to iterating, I think, you know, working so closely with the folks who are thinking about the experience and the interaction of that can really help you get, you know, hit the ground running before you even get fully started or fully invested into something that might, you know, rapidly change based on that feedback.
Mm-hmm. I personally really like doing design thinking types of activities with designers. And I would also say that depending upon your organization, what is a design versus product role can differ and overlap in some cases, because they're as we've said before, a huge part of being a product manager is being user focused, and that's the same for design. So like, for example, I really like doing problem definition together and drawing up discussion guides for user research together and defining the questions that I'm good at defining the questions that I need answered, and designers tend to be really good at framing those in like unbiased ways to get the right information out of people that we're talking to. So that's one collaboration point. And then after we have that information, I like to do like pain point prioritization sessions with designers. And so then we'll jointly kind of come together, flesh out from the research all the pain points that we heard, use some kind of criteria to prioritize them. What? And then from there, where we can kind of have a split happen is maybe we'll do crazy eights together, which is another kind of rapid design exercise. And at that point, the designer will have prioritized set of problem statements. Maybe we've done some user story ideation as well and prioritize that stuff. And they'll also have like maybe some inspiration from crazy eights. Then they can go say, here's a proposed prototype wireframe, whatever, for a higher fidelity version representing what the stuff could look like in terms of interaction design. So I don't know if that gives any like some tactical clarity to the types of stuff that I like to do with designers and kind of where we split.
I think those are some awesome tactics. And I'm going to throw in a third part of this question, which just came into the chat, which I think is very relevant to collaboration on teams. We talked about product managers and project managers a lot of times separately, but this audience member is wondering, what are some of the best ways product managers and project managers can work together? Go for it, hesitant Julie.
No trickery. No, seriously. I've seen it go so badly, and I've seen it go so well. And it comes down to people, like in this case is product managers and project managers working together. Understand each other's pain points. Have your friendly UX researcher sit you down and interview you about your own pain points on your projects and your working styles and all of that, to do whatever you got to do to come to the agreement about what is the delineation of work to be done, agree on the why you're doing it, and just sort of carry forth and be super, super honest and transparent. And, project manager, when your product manager is like, I want to experiment, and, you're like, but we have to get this done, and we already committed to these things in the sprint, like, work that out, but do it honestly, bring it up, don't let things fester. It's the same type of human interactions that you would do with anybody that's got what is essentially a conflicting set of goals. But as Rachel said very, very early on in this panel, the goals of a product manager and a project manager are not in conflict. They want to deliver. It's just going to deliver a little bit differently, something that's a little bit different, but they still want to deliver. So focus on the similarities, not the differences.
Oh, you want to go, Andrew?
Oh, I was just going to add, on top of Julie, I think creating that shared understanding, not only between, folks with those titles, but with the team, right? What are we building and why? And kind of seeking to understand what are the pressures or the things that each of these roles may have on their mind or what they're trying to accomplish, and then really coming together to figure out, this is a team sport, right? This is not, one person versus the other. This is like, hey, collectively, we're delivering value. And, how do we surface this in a way and work together to, again, I think to Julie's point is it's not always textbook. It doesn't always fit this mold. Stakeholders may still want to demand or see or have something done a certain way, but again, I think you just have to understand the environment that you're working in, the people you're working with, and lean on each other's strengths to kind of get things across the finish line and onto the next phase or the next chapter or the next project, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. And some of the touch points that I have found valuable to like come together, product and project throughout the course of building, shipping together. Some of those things are, number one, around any kind of regular planning activities that happen, like quarterly planning, or if an organization is using scaled agile PI, program increment planning. Because that way you have like the outcomes driven priorities part from the product manager, and you have the dependencies and like understanding what's happening across multiple teams part from the project manager. So that's an opportunity where you kind of have those freer form discussions to get to a happy medium on what the plan is going to be for the quarter or whatever period of time you're talking about. That's one thing. Another activity that I really like to do jointly with project managers is like have some kind of regular cadence of running through risks together. So if you have a risk register, you both are going to bring risks to the table from different advantages. And so having those collected in one space, you can kind of prioritize them and see where you need to lean in for mitigation and that kind of thing. So I think that's helpful. And depending, I mean, project management in government tends to be different sometimes than I've seen in private sector, where in private sector, a lot of times project management will kind of have almost a scrum sort of role, very involved in documentation and making sure that user stories are recorded and that sprints are populated with the right information, that kind of thing. In government, I tend to see them as like coordinating multiple work streams where there may be product people and scrum people inside each of those work streams. So depending upon what kind of organization you're in, it can also be really helpful to work with a project manager to like help translate the week's product goals into like the desired sprint deliverables. So those are some areas where collaboration can be helpful.
I love those tangible things folks can take away from our discussion, and some of the techniques that they can bring back to programs. We're at time. We're at 4 p.m. Eastern. So we didn't get to every one of the Q&A questions. If you still have an open question that we didn't get to, I think the best way to reach all of our panelists universally is probably via LinkedIn, right? And they can find some additional information that way and get in touch with you all. But with that, I'd love to thank you all for joining today's webinar. We will have a follow-up workshop to take these terms and create our working definitions, like I mentioned in the beginning of the session. And the last thing I'll mention is following this webinar, you'll be directed to a Zoom survey to provide some brief feedback on this panel discussion. Your inputs are highly valuable. But once again, thank you to all of our panelists and thank you for attending. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you.